change your name, please do all of those things. So I'm going to share my screen just for a few minutes and then I'll come back. I try not to share my screen for the duration because I want to be able to see you all and talk to you and interact that way. But I definitely want to make sure that you can see what we're talking about without me forgetting it, which will happen if I don't. So let me just bring up the right screen. Sharing my screen is my least favorite Zoom trick of all of the Zoom tricks. That's my least favorite because there's no way to not be awkward while doing it. Okay, so this is what I looked at all session. Now this is just the LGBTQ bills that I was looking at. Can folks see that okay? I'm just going to assume that you can.
Yes.
So these are some of my notes and things like that, but I just want folks to really, not that you didn't, but I want everyone to kind of just know and see the plethora of bills that we were up against. So the ones that were crossed out are the ones that went away. I'm trying to find nonviolent ways to talk about legislation, but it's hard when you're talking about killing bills and bills dying. So, and this isn't completely updated because some of them did get signed, some of the other ones did go away. But I just want to be able to show so people can really conceptualize. If you're thinking, wow, that was a really bad session, it felt like the attacks never stopped. You're not wrong. You're not wrong. They didn't. They just continued to kept swinging and kept piling it on to see what would stick, I guess, essentially. You know, there's some bad bills that did get eliminated, that did go away. And I do think that that's just for the time. I think that they'll come back. I think that some of them got crafty and creative and they didn't pass them the way they wanted to. So they'll go back to and recraft them again. So some of the ones that we did see go away was elimination of marriage license. That one disappeared. I think that will come back with some reiterations. If Senator Herndon can get some city clerks on board, that was definitely lacking. There will be absolutely library bans coming back, book bans coming back. They will resituate those. Those are going to get reworked for some sort of way. I think in the meantime, we're hopeful that people will engage with their local library. If you're not already, knowing who the folks that serve on your library board are in your local community, I would encourage that you figure out who they are and find out how you can support them. Is it showing up to their meetings? Is it knowing how their bylaws are written or any of those things? They need you to make calls for the right people. We need to put our libraries in a bubble. We have to protect them. HB 63 was one that would have allowed therapists and counselors to actually change and basically switch care for whoever they were caring for if they had goals or agendas that were against their religiously held beliefs, which basically was counselors trying to not work with trans people. And it was not a surprise that Young did not do a good job hiding that. And that bill was also held. I don't know if that one will come back. She's crafty. It definitely could. Another one that they attempted to pass was a medical ethics bill that was HB 308. It would have allowed anybody who comes in contact with any patient for any reason to not work with them or not provide services, again, based on firmly held religious beliefs. So, and that was not only religious beliefs, but it was also moral, ethical, and something else. So, concerns would have been like custodian staff and, somebody doesn't want to draw their blood or just a plethora of that. But that ended up backfiring because all of the anti-vaxxers, that means that people would have been able to discriminate against them too. And that is apparently not what they wanted. I'm so shocked, so shocked. The sex education bills, we're sure that those are going to come back. That opt-in mandate, that's one that we've seen repeatedly. That will certainly be back. And then there was a few other bills that did get through. 196, that was a parental rights bill. That one ended up also being held, it didn't get a hearing. That one will probably come back just around treating different school clubs as if they were sports teams. So that means they would have to have space on their website. You'd have to see their calendars, and you'd have to have a description of what they're doing at their clubs, which is basically a way to ensure that GSAs can't hide, that they can't be discreet. So not only is it kind of making sure that they're outed to their parents, but also community members. And then I'm sure it's a way for them to censor information, distribution, really support in them having access, I would assume. Let's see what else we have. We had 163, that was a good bill-ish. That amended for certain disclosures if they're going to be a harm to themselves or others. What I was assured is that that bill was codifying practices that are already in play. And that bill was actually a compromise bill from what was coming from the desires to force guidance counselors into outing their students if they talked about sexual orientation or gender identity. So 163 was actually the kind of like the compromise. So that ended up being good for our younger youth folks, that they codified something that's already in practice. It probably won't hurt them. And I can't say never, because that's not the way policy works. So we'll see. 170 did pass, and that prohibits state agencies from donating to Pride events, which was their way of making sure that folks like health and welfare are not sponsoring booths at Pride, even though the way they were sponsoring them was to make information available for programs, for health initiatives, and things like that. So that situation.
Hey, Chelsea,
we,
for a sec.
Go ahead.
For a sec.
I froze for a sec. Oh no. Okay. Are we still frozen? Are we okay now? We're okay now?
Good.
Okay. Thank you so much, Laura. There was a sex education bill that did pass. That was 228. Now that bill was a little bit tricky because technically we did not have codified a definition of abstinence. So that was now codified, but which that isn't technically a problem because it wasn't existing somewhere in Idaho code. The sketchy part is that they added it includes before marriage, even though abstinence before or after marriage or non-abstinence before or after marriage give you the same results, whether it's pregnancies or STIs or what have you. So that was one of Ed Hart's, one of her little pet projects. Of course, 1071, the Don't Say Gay bill, that bill was stopped. From what I understand, House Education Chair wasn't interested in hearing it and told them to rework it. I'm really surprised. And for those of you who have followed along the legislature prior, I was really shocked to see that House Education kind of became our backstop. It used to be Senate Education where things were kind of stopped. And this year it was the House. And Julie Yamamoto is not somebody that Add the Words would thank publicly because she still has done harm. And quite honestly, a thank you from an organization like us would probably not help her get reelected. But she is my personal legislator, and I will be reaching out to her to be like, hey, I really appreciated your discretion and the way that you ran your meetings and trying to just offer parity and making sure that everybody's voices were heard. So if you feel so, inclined to do so, I don't always thank people, but if you're a lobbyist, sometimes it's a good idea. You might want a meeting with one of those people someday, and they might appreciate the fact that you thanked them for the things that they didn't do horribly. The drag ban, you all know that that didn't end up getting passed. That will absolutely be back, and they will be looking and lurking, I'm sure, with video cameras or their phones or whatever devices they're using. I guess in my brain, they're always like from 1993 with like big camcorders, but they'll probably just have their iPhones out. You know, they're going to be lurking, and they're going to be looking for instances that they can say, look how inappropriate or crass or what have you, look how bad this is for children, look how obscene this is. They're going to be looking for that so they can come back next session and say that they have all of their ducks in a row. SB 1100 is the anti-trans bathroom bill. That one was signed on March 23rd. That passed. I know that in the coming weeks, the ACLU will have they'll have their versions of legislative debriefs. Theirs will come a little bit later because what they're working on right now are kind of like one-pagers for how to interact with these new laws that passed, which is going to be really important for all of us, especially if you are parents of or work with or in community with young trans folks. So that will be up and coming. And as soon as we have that information, we'll certainly be getting that out to folks as well. And then, of course, the horrendous HB 771. Everybody works so hard. And honestly, I don't think we would have worked as hard at the end, except for, you know, we were being told that the governor was looking for some cover, that they actually did want a way out. And I believe that he did. And, you know, if I were somebody that worked at one of the large employees here in Idaho, if I worked at Chobani or HP or Micron or any of those folks who are members of IACI, I would be asking, where were you? I would be asking, if I was an employee at Micron who gives 10 grand to Boise Pride, I would be asking, where were you publicly? There was definitely conversations had privately. I know that there was a lot of folks from a lot of different organizations and businesses and leadership roles, both current leadership and past elected officials, who had a lot of quiet conversations urging that veto. So I want you to know that there was tremendous amounts of people working on that, some who you would never have expected. Strong, staunch Republicans were working on that veto. But he did not have the cover that he needed. I personally think it was the lack of business cover. If he could have came at it from a commerce mind view, as far as commerce goes and how it was going to harm the workforce, I think that there would have been a better likelihood. And I also know and feel that those calls, the way that they were reported, I don't think that that was necessarily accurate. We know that the Family Policy Center spent a lot of time and dumped a lot of money into robocalls, and that certainly skewed things. But I think that once they switched to that automated system and people weren't having to necessarily give their zip codes, I think things definitely changed as far as the coverage looked. We've got a question in the chat. Does that cover need to be more public, not private? Yeah, I mean, the public pressure from all of us as community members is an important piece, but what he needed was for Micron and Chobani and HP and all the large, huge employers to come out publicly with like a letter and be like, Betty, you need to veto this. This is hurting our workforce. This is going to hurt the kids of our workforce. This is going to, put a damper on recruitment to our workforce and the quality of our workforce. You have to veto this bill. And that's what helped with the bill in the prior session, 675, was there was a public veto letter issued from those big businesses, and you just can't argue with the big businesses. Like, you can have all the noise in the world from all the loud minority that you want, but it's kind of like those are just the kids on the playground. And then it's like the big businesses roll up and it's like the high schoolers came down to the playground for a second and they're there to regulate. And they're like, okay, let's start playing the adult games again and let's get things back in order. And I know that a lot of conversations happened quietly, but without that public cover, it just wasn't going to happen. There was multiple meetings with the governor's office. Those meetings went well. They were receptive. The governor's office was respectful. They asked a lot of questions. And physicians were absolutely tireless. If you haven't used the link on one of our social media bios yet to send a note to the physicians, I would really encourage that you do. They were still trying to see their 1,500 patient loads and then figuring out how to lurk. We were teaching them how to stalk and lurk at the Capitol because senators were hiding, and they were like snagging them on their way out of committees and being like, you and I need to chat. Anybody that would talk to them. I was on calls with them well into the evening as they prepared for testimonies and learned how to do pivot messaging. And I mean, they just continued to give and give. And not one time were any of those conversations ever about what was going to happen to them. Not one time were they talking about being criminalized. None of that. They were talking about how are we going to save our kids? How are we going to save our community? So if you have spaciousness and haven't used that link yet, then I would certainly encourage you to. There were some reproductive focused bills that definitely are going to impact our community, especially 242. That bill criminalizes what they're calling trafficking, taking a minor over state line to get access to abortion care without parental consent is now going to be considered criminal. And that had, I am pretty sure, unless I have made it up in a dream, that had a 30-day clause on it. So that goes into effect like ASAP, which really just harms so many people, because that's definitely going to impact folks in our trans community. That's definitely going to impact our youth if they don't have a trusted adult that's the guardian or parent. That's going to put them in a vulnerable position. And then, of course, I think you probably have seen that our AG Labrador came out with, another sort of briefing claiming that other things were illegal, getting medications were illegal. And then he has since walked that back. And ACLU and Planned Parenthood did file suit against our AG for those statements. So we'll keep folks updated. We do try to cross share because of course, as we all know, those reproductive bills do intersect with queer and trans lived experiences. There were a plethora of other bills that were either education or workforce or certainly criminal justice reform that absolutely intersect with LGBTQ people. Those were not bills that I was personally following or tracking. But we do know that Planned Parenthood will be having their debrief coming up soon. And then probably like later on in May is when you'll start seeing the ACLUs. And those are certainly calls that I'll be on because I'll be wanting to get information too and debrief and support them. So as we know when those dates are, we'll definitely encourage folks to hop on those calls so that you can get a wider and deeper scope of really the other lays of the land that we're coming through with those bills. But I want to pause there for a moment before I talk a little bit more about 71 and just see what questions there are or any clarifying, any offerings that I can make there. So I'll pause there. You can just hop on, come on off the mute and ask your question, Nixon.
I think you were trying to say something.
Sorry about that. You think I'd figured this out after all this time?
Same.
You said that there were a lot of staunch Republicans, even behind the scenes, trying to do this. Is business like? Is it economy? Is it business? Like, what is the moving factor, the driving factor for some of those people? I'm just curious.
Parental rights.
Parental rights.
It's parental rights. Yeah. So for a lot of those Republicans, it was. They may not agree socially with the idea of, supporting trans people. Like that's not a hill they will die on. But parental rights, yeah, you don't mess with that. Mm-hmm. We're Idaho. We'll let you kill your kids with your faith by not giving them cancer treatment. So that's kind of where they're coming from. And that was certainly the pinpoint for most of them. And I think that's why it was so disappointing, is because there were some Republicans that put that political capital out there and put their neck on the line with that no vote on the Senate floor, which would have sustained his veto, which we didn't even think we would have had, which is why we kind of thought that we were done. And then that vote happened, which is also because of all the folks that were making calls to those senators. I mean, our list of key senators to talk to try and get that bill to die on the floor, there was 11 on the list, and 5 of those 11 voted with us. That is no small thing. That's huge. That's like colossal. That's not something that we see happen very often. And that happened because of the conversations and the trans youth and the parents of trans youth and the physicians that were going and meeting with those senators. And, Abby Lee, folks like Abby Lee in leadership, she didn't give her reasoning. But if you were one of the people that spoke to her behind closed doors, that parental rights, despite the fact that she was having piles of trash science put on her desk, that's what she was leaning up against, was those parental rights, for sure. And if you heard the debates, there was a couple of them that gave really personal and heartfelt stories about why they weren't gonna vote against trans people. But for some of the people behind closed doors, it was parental rights and just good medicine. Criminalizing doctors, that's a slippery slope, because who's going to decide what they get criminalized for next? Is it going to be an experimental treatment for diabetics, or anything? So it was definitely the parental rights and just the idea of criminalizing people who have been in school for a decade. Who are they to say those people should not be able to do their job?
Thank you.
Absolutely. Are there other questions about pieces of legislation or the session in general? I know it happened. I mean, it felt like it was just piling on and moved really fast. Angela?
Yeah, I would listen at work, and the discussion around the period products at school was so heartbreaking. And I felt like it was a vote against children, against teachers. Anyway, so I just had to put those 2 cents in that.
That was a rough one. That making sure people had menstruation projects was too woke, is what they basically said it was. I think, I think if it had been from like something called the Idaho period projects instead of the Boise period project, and if people who had testified, if they had people from Pocatello, Northern Idaho, if they had different representation, but anytime you stick the name Boise on it, that is an automatic trigger for a lot of those. There's Republicans, and then there's like the Freedom Caucus extremists, right? So anything like that is just very triggering. The word Boise, I'm pretty sure, is triggering for most of them. So hopefully with some time they can finesse that, and I think that there might have another chance later. They would just need to have some more conversations without the Boise word, hopefully. But yeah, that was a rough one. They were all tough to watch. It was very. Was there really a bill introduced where we weren't swearing for half of it? That's just kind of the way that it was.
Well,
go ahead.
I just want to say, he's new, I don't remember his name, but he was a principal, and he talked about it, and I thought, oh, this is such a good person to advocate. And when women legislators voted against that, even listening to that was just beyond. But anyway, thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that there was an interview recently that Jen sent me with Julie Yamamoto, Chairman Yamamoto, and she did such a great job of the way that she kind of just explains, if they got no for an answer, the more Freedom Caucus members, if they got no for an answer that was delivered in a diplomatic this was the vote, this was the conversation, you had your chance, and people said no, then they didn't accept that no. So then they come back and take a yes with force. And I think that that's really what we're kind of seeing play out, is the way that the Freedom Caucus members come back and take with force if they don't get the answer they want the first time. I don't know how leadership or how, you know, people who sit on what's probably the other side of the aisle from a lot of us are going to navigate that. That's kind of their thing to figure out, but we're the ones definitely watching the dynamic play. And it's, I mean, it's entertaining, but it's also terrifying. Absolutely terrifying. So I want to just offer some insights, and I will just say that these are not fun insights, but they're just more clarifications that I have received from HB 71 on navigating. People are going to have to navigate that bill moving forward. I was on a call recently with some local physicians and some legal counsel, because again, they have just been trying to figure out how do they work around this bill? Is there a work around this bill? And as of right now, there's not. There's not a way to do telehealth. There is not a way to go over the border and then fill a prescription here. There's not a way to do telehealth or go over the border, have a prescription and have it mailed to your house. Pharmacists would be considered liable because they're credentialed the same way. So those are all pretty scary, and definitely, I don't know. I was hoping that there was going to be some wiggle room. You know, we were definitely hoping there was going to be some wiggle room, and that thing is pretty iron tight. There is a clause in the bill that talks about you can do things that are prohibited by the language if there are symptoms or XYZ that are caused by it. And that, we know that the bill language was written as a way to almost promote or pretend as if detransitioning is a really common thing. And that's what that clause was intended for. But there's people examining to see that if a symptom is suicide, right? Suicide attempts or ideation, if that is one of the symptoms, if that would be a workaround against what is prohibited. So I don't know, but that's, I'm hopefully ACLU will have more information in May. You can't necessarily pick it up at an out-of-state pharmacy. The concern with that is if they come back and add other language. Basically, the option that was best presented was you'd have to go out of state and then have like a PO box out of state, like in Ontario. Like those are kind of the options that people will have. And that's pretty limiting and yeah, pretty sobering, I would say.
Can I add a little bit to that, Chelsea?
Please.
Yeah, just and I know there's still like legal talking points being prepared by this, because everything is just, you're talking about like mifepristone right now. Yeah.
No, this is for the gender affirming care.
Oh my gosh, I'm sorry, I'm multitasking right now. If you get to that,
you're fine.
but yeah, I know that I can at least say that in Washington state, there's been laws that have been passed that the governor's going to sign any day now that will protect folks who are coming into the state who are trying to get gender affirming care. So at least I know that if you're going somewhere, Washington state's taken proactive steps already to pass those laws. And I hope that other progressive states follow suit as well, like Oregon and other things, so that folks don't have to travel too far from Idaho. But
and one of those is a shield law, right? Like it shields people's personal information, Jen?
Yeah, there's like a couple. So one's a shield law that would protect like providers who are offering care to folks who are coming in from out of state for that care. And then there's a bill that they're calling My Health, My Data, that is protecting people's data on your phones, because your phone's always tracking what you're doing, right? And so this would protect you if you are in Washington state and Googling where to get certain types of gender affirming care or where to get prescriptions, or X, Y, or Z that has been outlawed in Idaho. That's not to say that it'll protect you if you're Googling that or visiting those websites in Idaho, but if you have crossed into Washington, your data would be protected there. Ideally, that's the argument that's being made, and that bill has passed both chambers as well, is my understanding. And so it's likely to get signed by the governor in the next few weeks.
Washington coming in clutch.
And
Feels like
it's
they're
a
doing that
direct
a lot.
response, right? Those are direct
Yeah.
responses to Idaho. So yeah.
Perfect. Bonnie, what kind of questions do you have?
Yeah, Mike, I was curious if I know like in doing like access to needle exchange, like I was wondering if there was a way locally that like say a city or part of the state could deem it like an emergency that trans people be treated medically and kind of get around that, kind of like they used to do that with access to needles. It's like technically it was illegal to have them, but the city could agree to not prosecute or not, you know what I mean? Like there were ways to kind of work around that. And I wonder if there's more localized stuff that could be done. Like say Boise could do something or Twin Falls could do something.
Well, the way it's written, it really criminalizes anybody who provides the care, writes the prescription, provides the medications. So that kind of eliminates people being able, really being able to do most of that. I mean, the only thing that doesn't criminalize is mental health, which we know there's not enough mental health care in the world. That's not going to keep somebody from being trans. Yeah, the only other thing is there will be that grace. There's a grace period for that transition of care, for the planning to happen. Even I think they did decide that there is a way for, like if I was a doctor and you were my patient and you were being seen out of state for gender affirming care, and I'm treating you because you're also a diabetic, I can talk to your doctor out of state to make sure that what we're doing doesn't negatively impact each other, as long as I'm not talking to you when you're in Idaho about gender affirming care. As long as I'm not helping you with that is pretty much the scope of what they're able to do. And Boise tried to do something similarly around abortion access, saying, we're not going to pursue people around abortion care. And then they came for them this legislative session to be like, if you do what you say you're going to do, which is still help people access abortion care, we're going to make sure that you can't access taxes. So could they do that? Maybe. Well, I feel like every time we come up with something municipal, then the legislative body comes down and they're like, no, you cannot. We are in charge and municipalities have no control. That's what they did when we started passing municipal non-discrimination ordinances, right? They started passing laws that were like, you can't outlaw bags and you can't increase city government wages. We're going to ban you from being able to do that. Now, retroactively, they have changed. They can give their city employees wage increases again, but that was something that the legislature banned when we started passing non-discrimination ordinances. So it'll be curious to see, but given all of that more dire, and really it was pretty soul crushing to sit on that call with the physicians, because they were just like throwing everything at the wall that they possibly could. I tell you, these people are dedicated and they love our trans youth so much. The good thing is that there's hopefully, and it feels like every time I've heard lawyers and legal counsel speak, there's a good chance that we could get an injunction here in the state. Once ACLU files suit, even in red states where Trump had judge appointees, we have seen injunctions happen to put a pause. Now, the tricky thing is that in some states, those injunctions have only been until the trial starts. So hopefully the injunction that they seek and the one that is accepted and hopefully given here in Idaho will just put a pause entirely until proceedings are done. And I don't know the workarounds of that. I am not a lawyer, but that is something that we can certainly hope for and that people feel is somewhat plausible. And that's another, another reason that once ACLU has their call, I'm sure that we'll be on it, and being there to hold space and support, and they'll absolutely probably have one of their national lawyers on it. And there's going to be more meetings in the future to talk about HB 71 specifically. So we're going to try to have calls with just legal counsel so that parents can get their questions answered. We're also going to have calls with physicians and mental health providers privately, so we can talk about what does the next 6 months look like so that we can prepare to support our trans youth and their families if this law goes into effect. So just know that those conversations are happening. So you're going to see more calls come up. If we don't get a long enough injunction from the lower court, could we get one from the ninth? Possibly, right? That depends on like how they file. There's just so many things up in the air right now. There's so many different little pieces of dominoes effects. Nikki's sharing, I'm reading because folks are going to be watching this recording later. We're talking with our physician for the next week, but his nurse will let us know last week that he's working on getting his Oregon's license to potentially service across the border, as long as we can have the meds shipped to Oregon Clinic and administered there. But we don't know if that will work yet with insurance. That's the tricky thing. When it comes to Oregon, if you're on Medicaid, you won't be able to get those things out of state. But depending on if you have private insurance, you need to find out what's covered and how. Because there's some people, physicians where they can't treat XYZ, they have to send them out of state. And so insurance covers it out of state. So it's really going to be up to folks to find out what is covered and what is going to be viable. But for people who are dependent on Medicaid, it's one of those things that it's not going to work other places. I know it's just so much BS. It makes me want to say all of the swear words. But all of that said, take heart in the fact that there are really good people working on this. There are experts with amazing organizations who have been working on this since the bill dropped. ACLU National was looking at this before it was even introduced. The only thing they didn't know is what the bill language was. Okay, but we already knew it was coming, and people were bracing for impact. Even if we weren't talking about it, we knew it was coming. So, take heart in the fact that people have been preparing and knew that Idaho was going to get hit like this. And there have been good people preparing for that blowback to do what was going to have to be done if we couldn't get it stopped in the legislature. And we knew that that was going to be a wild card. We knew that with the new dynamic. We knew it with this Freedom Caucus bullshit. Like, we knew that if getting something like that stopped was going to be damn near impossible. And we absolutely still throw everything at the wall and try to organize and try to coordinate and still show up to testify, because it's important for those things to be on the record in court. It's important for the stories to be there. It's important that they say the horrendous things they say so that we can show their intent. And all of that said, when it can't be stopped, we knew that litigation would be the next step, and that there was going to be somebody there to pick that up. Yes, Natalie, please.
Yeah, I just wanted to say for the insurance part, if you have private insurance, there are a lot of businesses since Roe versus Wade that have started making changes to their policy to say that if you can't get services in state, that you can travel for them and that they'll cover it. And they've done that really for abortion, but because it's Idaho, a lot of places haven't specified that it's for abortion. They just say if you can't get healthcare in state and have to travel, that it's covered. So I would think under a policy like that, that trans healthcare would also now fall under that. Mm-hmm. So look at your policy, and also if you have private insurance, I would reach out to your HR department and say, if it's not something you have, are you working on this? And is this something that we can get implemented? Because I know, like, I work at St. Luke's. It's a huge organization. They made that change in the last year. Yeah. And like I said, they won't publicly say it's because of abortion, but that's what that's what sparked the
Absolutely.
original conversation.
Yeah.
So oh, I guess I shouldn't say we're recording, but whatever. So, you know, just to think about that and work with your HR companies if you can, if you have private insurance, because that's also a possibility if it's not on there, to try and make that change in the next 6 or 8 months.
Mhm. Yeah, that's huge. Thank you for that. And honestly, if anybody who works for those major employers, I would be like, you better be. You didn't come out for my kid during legislative session publicly, so you better be adding that to my coverage. You better be setting that aside to make sure that if we had to travel out of state, that we can. That's the least you can do, is come through on something like that. I think that I know that there's just so many questions around HB 71, and there's going to be such a need for ensuring that people have the support that they need in the ways that they need it. And, you know, add the words, we're not a legal organization. So that's something that we're always going to work in partnership and try to get the right folks in front of the room to make sure that questions are answered appropriately and correctly, right? So the information I'm passing along is what I have gathered from the calls that I have been included in. But we will certainly be checking in with our partner organizations like ACLU to find out when they're having info calls and or co-sponsoring spaces where, you know, parents, community members can come and get those legal questions answered so that people know how to proceed. And that might change again, right? If we get an injunction, okay, then what changed? Now what do we do, right? So every step of the way, we're going to kind of be keeping our ears to the ground to find out what's happening next and what kind of support people are going to need from there. We still worked with gender affirming therapists throughout this legislative session. We're still trying to ensure that people have access to that. And we'll be continuing to have those conversations. It might be an online Zoom space, not only for trans youth, but also for trans parents and guardians, because we feel like the people who take care of trans kids, they need space to be loved on and just kind of process all of this chaos that's happening as well. But I want to pause there and see if there's any other legislative questions before we kind of talk about what's next for Add the Words. Are there any other questions around policy pieces? I don't see hands going up. Natalie, do you still have a question, or is your hand up? She might be puttering around the kitchen again.
No, sorry.
Oh, you're fine. Okay. Yeah, Sarah.
Relatedly, in this legal conversation, so this isn't quite a legislative update. I have someone from Lambda Legal reached out to me about the bathroom bill. And looking for folks who might be interested in being plaintiffs and litigants on that bill. So knowing that there's so many lawsuits that are going to launch out of this session, it's going to be a little mind-numbing. So I'm happy to make connections for folks who want to learn more and understand more about any of them, and just kind of figuring out like where might your and your family's best fit be, because there's lots of opportunity to in those next steps. But that's one little piece that has just been in my background that I've been chatting with some folks about that.
Absolutely. And let us know how we can support that as well. I mean, I was a plaintiff for a reproductive justice case when I was pregnant. Being a plaintiff is a whole other ballgame. And we can certainly have conversations about what that looks like. I think it's really important to have not only talk to the folks who could be potentially representing you about what they do and how they support you as their plaintiff, but I think it's important to talk to people who have also been plaintiff in other cases, who can give you that really unbiased, here's the reality of what it looks like to be a plaintiff's type of scenario. It does bring a different element into your life and into your space.
Yeah, it's a lot. And what I just want to offer to folks is no one wants to coerce anybody, and they're all happy to talk, and but that there's a lot of opportunity because there's just so much bad legislation. And so in my family, I know we're having multiple conversations with multiple teams trying to figure out where we would be the best fit and where we can help. But I just want to make my own personal plug for this attorney with Lambda Legal, who's based out of Tucson, Arizona, where I was born, who worked with my mom, who is trans, who's been helping my family on our name change paperwork. So there's a lovely connection there, and he's really interested in supporting Idahoans and moving this path forward. So, and I know there's a lot of other entities out there, ACLU and Legal Voice and lots of other spaces that are also looking at how they can be a support and a voice in this next part of the process.
Definitely. Absolutely. And I know that there was somebody else that's looking at cases in Idaho. Their organization escapes me, but another group who's looking at possibly the housing discrimination for queer and trans folks. We're looking at Idaho for cases for that. So yay, taxpayers. We get to pay for all these cases. Anything else around litigation or policy? Okay. Certainly if something comes up while we're continuing our chat, I want to be respectful of folks' time, but still kind of give a preview where we're going with not Legal Voice, but with Add the Words. We have been here for a very long time, right? It's now pretty much a vintage organization as far as goals go. Trying to update the Idaho Human Rights Act to include sexual orientation and gender identity. I think Jen and I are in agreement that probably will not happen. We don't think in our time here in Idaho, possibly not in our lifetimes, unless the pendulum swings all the way through and something happens federally. So when Jen and I came into leadership with Add the Words, I came on, I was a volunteer. Misty Tolman was the chair at the time, so blame her. I was helping out here in Canyon County, and then things just escalated very quickly, and I took over in 2015. And it was then that I flipped it from a PAC to a nonprofit because I felt like a PAC was too narrow and it wasn't serving our community in the most thoughtful ways, given the political dynamic and knowing that we weren't actually going to get Add the Words passed. We will always introduce it. It will always be a personal bill. It's kind of an honorary thing, but it's not going to happen. Not right now. So we expanded that, and with Jen's help and just her visionary abilities and how we've collaborated together with a lot of teachings that we're bringing in from other spaces and liberation work, we wanted to make it more community centric. We wanted it to ebb and flow with the needs of community. And so that's what we've tried to do. We've tried to ensure that we work through a racial equity lens, a radical racial equity lens, and honoring that first and foremost, making sure that, our Black, Indigenous siblings of color are always thought of and centered, and our trans siblings are always centered. And that's one of the reasons we started the mutual aid, and we started that after COVID, because we could see that there were people falling through the cracks. There was some really great organizations trying to do that mutual aid work, but they had a lot of hoops and ladders and barriers, and we were struggling to find a place for our community members and people who had been recently incarcerated, people who were sex workers, people who didn't have insurance or who had mixed documentation in their household. All of those things were coming into play. And so mutual aid has continued to be important. One thing that we've been asked to do is to re-examine our mutual aid to include travel for people who need to seek gender affirming care. That is not a discussion that Jen and I were prepared to embark on. It wasn't necessarily on our list, but we are pausing our mutual aid distribution momentarily so that we can try to rethink how in the hell that would work and how we do that. Because I personally don't know what that calendaring looks like. Like, is that a weekly, bi-weekly? Is this a monthly stipend? How are we going to get around taxes? Do we have to pay providers directly? We don't have the answers to that yet, but we're absolutely willing to try and and start doing some research in other parts of the country to see if anybody else is doing it. We've also, I know that I have been asked if we're going to extend mutual aid to relocation funds for people who are going to relocate out of the state. I also was not prepared for that. You know, we have been limited with sometimes the amount that we can give people because we don't want them to get dinged tax wise, right? That's always, we have removed every barrier. Treat people as though they are trustworthy, and they will be. There's no give us your pay stubs. There's no what's your social security number. There's none of that. People have asked for money. We Venmo, Cash App, PayPal. If we need to pull it out and deliver it in an anonymous envelope, we have done the things to get people what they needed when they needed it. But these things are trickier and a little bit more complicated. So mutual aid, we still want that to be a huge focus. So if you notice that we're going to be updating and moving a little bit slower, it's because we don't have the answers and we want to move intentionally. We want to move without harming people unintentionally, especially our trans siblings when they're already going through so much. So that is one of the things that we'll be looking for, is folks who want to help with mutual aid, not only to raise and cultivate mutual aid and raising funds, but to help possibly with distributions. And that could be something that doesn't take up a lot of time necessarily. The way we had it formatted now, it did take up quite a bit of time, and it was actually really difficult because we were the ones reading the stories that were coming in. So that got very heavy, very fast. So we're trying to just figure out a way where people feel like they can tell their stories if they want to, but we still have a way to prioritize the needs based on requests coming in. And I just don't know what it's going to look like. I don't know what kind of amounts we're going to have to try to raise to help people where they're at now. We want to continue to ebb and flow with our community members. So that's what's being asked of us right now. So that's what we're going to do. And yes, we will absolutely have those conversations, Sarah. Somebody else asked me to, they applied, add the words for something, but I don't remember what it was. A plate partnership, I think is what they called it, maybe something like that. So yeah,
Yes.
We'll definitely be looking for that.
That, I think that might have been someone from my congregation.
Was it Kathy? Kathy's?
Yes.
Okay. Yep. Sure was.
However, I mean, on a larger scale, like all of the progressive faith leaders are meeting on Monday, and this is one of the things on our agenda too. Similar, like how can we plug in, support, amplify, fundraise? Like, what are the needs, and how can we do a thing?
Yeah, let's do the things. I know that we have to get signed up for Idaho Gives soon. It's probably going to be late. We're going to get charged a fine for that, but like that might be the next big plug, right? Is Idaho Gives, and how do we make it huge, and how much money can we raise for gender affirming care to send people out of state? Like, yeah, yes, more of this. Yes, Laura. So mutual aid, that's not something that we ever intended to be such a huge focal point, but I don't feel like it's something that's going to go away. We thought it was going to be like a COVID thing, and people need it for things that aren't COVID related. They've needed it to stay in their houses and to get the prescriptions filled, and for abortion care access this session. Like, it's just, I don't think it's going anywhere. We still got trans kids who are being kicked out of their homes. So feel like mutual aid is here to stay. So people who want to embark on those things, that's something that we're looking for. For the most part, it's just been Jen and myself kind of running things and holding things down. Natalie was kind enough to step in when we both needed to take some maternity leave. Natalie's also been there in person whenever, because Natalie knows how the things work. She's been around, she's seen, the session. So guiding people to and from Capitol, holding space when we've had fundraisers and things like that. We have a couple of superstar volunteers, but otherwise it's pretty much just Jen and I. And we're looking to revamp that. Part of that is because of COVID. It was just too extractive to ask people to volunteer and do those things when they were barely able to sustain as it was. The other component of it is that this work has become more polarized. It's become more violent in some spaces, and it's been difficult to ask our queer and trans people, hey, do you want to come and volunteer at this booth? I can't guarantee that you won't be, verbally accosted, but we'd love to come have you at Pride. Like, that's a really difficult ask to do. So we've even tried to give people who are volunteering with us stipends, like, can we cover your gas? Can we cover your food? We want to pay you something, small hourly stipend wise, so that if it's at least enough to cover the therapy session that you might need after doing a 3-hour shift with us at Pride, because you get an asshole that comes through, like, it's the least that we can do, right? To try to be less extractive, to try to be less harmful, because showing up in those spaces is exhausting. Peopling is hard when everybody shows up to your booth and they want to tell you their story. And we have recognized that. So looking for the volunteers, we try to just come into that transparently. So people who want to help with Pride teams, there are beautifully more Pride events in Idaho than there have ever been before. Silver Valley, Palouse, Twin, Idaho Falls, Pocatello. Coeur d'Alene is my favorite. It is gorgeous and just lovely. So there's lots of different Pride events that we like to be able to send people to. We would love to have a youth organizer kind of cohort, and also intergenerational. We have elders that are not getting heard, they're not getting loved on, they're not getting taken care of. We're standing on their shoulders with the work that we do, and they're not being honored for that. So something that brings elders back into purview. We're also looking for regional directors. So if you know folks from across the state, we have such a difficulty of maintaining something that feels statewide and not Ada County focused because of our legislative advocacy work. But what works for people down in the Treasure Valley does not necessarily work in Eastern Idaho, and it does not necessarily compute up in Northern Idaho. So being able to have regional directors that can tell us what the needs are of community up there, so that we can get funds up there, so that they can have dinner together, they can have a youth craft space night or something like that. Like, those kinds of things are really important. So people are feeling brought in. We would love to have a larger legislative advocacy team so that other people can teach people how to community organize. I've been doing this for over 10 years. We don't need to talk about exactly how long, but long enough. There are other people who have new, creative, inventive ways to do this. The next generation of people need to come in and feel like they have their feet sturdy and under them so they can come in and do this. So we want to expand our advocacy team. We want to be able to have a trans liberation focus. The reason we have never held in the recent years Trans Day of Visibility or Remembrance is because currently we're not led by folks that are trans, and we're not going to co-opt that space. That just is not for us. So when there are people who want to come in and take up that space, then we are going to give them the space. If that means they do, just figure out the speakers and they want us to line up the ASL interpreters and make sure that the space is reserved, then we'll do that. But it needs to be trans-led. So we want to be able to have a trans liberation component to our organization as well, so that we're not just supporting, but also being led by and instructed and guided with that lens. And then, it would be really great to also have people with legal expertise. We're an organization who is ran by volunteers. If there are people who are pro bono lawyers that were like, you know what, I can do 20 hours of figuring out what the hell that bill means during legislative session so that you can act faster on it. That would be really fantastic. And then the other piece is finding folks who know how to do grant writing. A lot of our organizational funding as of right now is either donated or it is literally all made possible by Pride Foundation. And that's because we applied for a grant with them once. I don't even know how long ago that was. And then they have just been like, you're doing great. We know that the people that you were loving on with the funds that we're giving you are making a difference. So just keep doing that. During COVID, they stopped making us do what a lot of grants do, is make you report out certain things. And they kind of took those barriers away and were like, just focus on staying afloat, focus on serving and loving on your people. And then they have just continued to give us financial backing so that we can do that, so that we can you know, hire and contract with lawyers so that we can feed people, so that we can focus on getting people gas stipends and parking stipends if they need it. And that's not something that we would have been able to do with Pride Foundation. But we've been approached by other organizations who are like, we like what you do, you should apply for this grant. And I'm like, that's cute that you think I have time. I would love to, right? Like I would love to, but those are 22 pages long. And I also need to have a job, and I have 2 small children. And I'm a great writer, but I don't have experience writing grants. So people who have experience with writing grants who might want to help and be in partnership so that we can apply more, so we can bring in more funding, and do more things. We have lots of ideas that we would love to infuse into the community. They take time, they take money. So those are things that we're looking for as well. And then possibly events, like we know that we need to have more events. I love event coordinating. It takes a lot of time, something that we want to do. If anybody has ever followed our friends at Equality Utah, they have an Allies Gala, and it's a really huge fundraiser, sit down dinner with speakers and all. We would love to do something like that, to bring somebody in from out of state, like a comedian or a fun personality where people get to come and get dressed up and be in space together and you know, make fun of the jerks maybe a little bit, and good, and just in good fun, but to have a good time and hand out some awards and love on some people, to do something that's rooted completely in joy and just feels good. So those are some of the things that we would love to be able to do, to love, for people to be in partnership with us at whatever capacity they have. Maybe it's a monthly meeting, maybe it's small group meetings. Right now, it's pretty much Jen and I in between the babies napping. It's usually how we plan things. So we're excited to be in partnership with whatever is feeling palatable for people, with whatever people have capacity for and are feeling joy towards. Like if you're like, never make me talk to people, but I'll email people, I'll do clerical work, I love Excel spreadsheets, like there's a place for that too, right? So we're happy to meet people where they're at. So I'm going to pause there and see if there's other ideas that I'm missing that are generating for people, and just kind of see how that's landing. And I'll take notes in case anybody has extra ideas that I missed.
Chelsea, I wonder if you all have a board or a community advisory council or some entity like you were suggesting that meets regularly that can help talk through and strategize and take on some of these ideas that sound really lovely and exciting beyond just legislative advocacy. Like I love the gala idea because it feels fun and we need some fun.
Yeah, we do need fun. Most of them have either moved or stepped down out of capacity limitations. And we also we're trying to build something that's not hierarchical. So we want something that is led by community and deeply felt. So we're looking at more of a non-governance community advisory situation, less imposing, right? Less imposing of this is the way you're going to do things, more of we're from community, we know what community wants and needs. And then we're also trying to balance out not being extractive, because we want people from community, but we don't want to be extractive. So if they're queer and trans, how do we compensate them for the time, or make sure that everything we do is accessible? So if they're with young children and we have a meeting, we need to be able to have childcare or send them home with dinner because now they're missing out on cooking a meal for their families. So when we're looking at those models, we're trying to make sure that we're examining them really intentionally so that we don't end up being extractive from beloved community more so than the work already is.
That's great.
Yes. I know there's things happening in the chat. I was looking at your faces. What is the best method of contact to send ideas that come to us after this meeting? I would say just email us, add the words at Gmail. That's the easiest because then it stays in one place. when people message us on Instagram or Twitter, which I rarely check, or Facebook, it kind of gets lost in the weeds. So I would say that email is definitely a good place. Yes, Jen just right up there in the chat, taking care of all the things. Oh, I'm excited. When is Idaho Falls Pride, Melissa? Do you know off the top of your brain? June 24th. Okay. I know that feels far away, but I know it's not far away. And it's kind of too close. Yeah, Timothy.
For the grant writing, my father is a retired grant writer for a nonprofit, and when he retired, swore he would never do another grant application again. So I would really have to talk him into it, but I'm wondering, do you know, are there upcoming deadlines you're looking at with that, or?
Yeah, there's one that's upcoming this month and another, I want to say next month. But I can send it to you just to glance at if that would feel good.
Sure, yeah, because having some more information to talk with him might be helpful.
And I think with the grants, even having someone who's an expert grant writer review and give us like feedback would be immensely helpful, rather than us just kind of going in with not a lot of experience in grants and not knowing what we're doing sometimes.
Yeah, and his organization was able to use state money in Wisconsin for some pretty creative outcomes to help people. And so I'm curious if he might have some space there. But yeah, I'll follow up with you and see if I can talk him into it.
Awesome. Thanks, Timothy.
I'll talk to
Nixon,
my
please.
mom too.
Okay.
She used to write a lot of grants. She's a teacher. She wrote technology. She wrote a ton of grants in Rockland and got computers for every classroom. So I don't know if it was a lot of work, but I will talk to her because she's trying to find a way to support the community. So,
I love teachers. They're going to save us all. It's fine. Thanks to mom.
can I ask one more question?
Please.
I'm very excited to get involved. So what is the next step from here? There's a lot of things that are interesting to me personally. So what's the best way to kind of work with you all on figuring out where to fit in?
I think now that we kind of have this information recorded and we'll put it out there, and I'll probably try to make something pretty to be like, here's some of the things we're looking for. Then we'll probably just have another meeting, maybe at the end of the month, and be like, okay, now this information has been put out there. People have had time to marinate on it a bit. Let's just come together and see what happens. Let's come together and have some of those conversations and see what people have energy for. I think that that's always the biggest thing too, is I'm never going to ask people to volunteer for something that doesn't light them up. Like, this work is heavy and hard during the legislative session, but the work itself, I love. The content makes me want to pull my hair out, but like lobbying and community organizing is my love language. Like I thoroughly enjoy it. And I want people to have that kind of same experience. And we also want to be able to do it in a way that builds people up, so that this is still like a choir, where if you need to take a step back and breathe, that you can do that, right? It doesn't have to be all the time relentless, tireless. It needs to be balanced and sacred, and honoring the fact that you're still human with human needs. So that's kind of the component. So I think the next step is, sitting with it, sitting what populates for you and comes up, and then we'll have another meeting together and just see what people are ready to move on. We'll see where the energy goes and see what happens next. I think we're super open to wherever Add the Words needs to go based on what community is asking for. Sarah.
I had just one more question, Chelsea, and if it feels a little inappropriate, you just let me know.
Oh no, please.
What I want to know is, how are you all financially right now to like float through this time, and is there an urgent need for some immediate funds?
Yeah, I would say that when we look and consider the requests that are being asked of us, I mean, we certainly try not to move with urgency and scarcity, but I would say that when I look at what we want to be able to provide for community as far as mental health services and just spaciousness for people to be together, that there's going to become some urgency this summer for sure, in making sure that we can provide that space. People really, really enjoyed it when we were like, just come have lunch. We're going to have pizza and we're just going to make sure that trans folks have space to be together and understand what the hell's going on. And just that I think making sure that counseling is available to folks is going to be just so vital, not only for our trans youth, but also their families. We want to be able to make sure that the parents and guardians are having space for those opportunities too.
Absolutely. Yeah. I just wanted to get a urgency.
Yeah.
Not a good word, but a sense of timeline and growth of need over time. And also so I can bring to colleagues, because I know myself, my community and many of our communities, one of the things that we can offer easily is space.
Definitely. Yeah, absolutely. Which is going to become vital, especially when we're looking at other parts of the state, to make sure that we're not staying localized to Boise. Absolutely. But how are we going to offer space for community to be together in Coeur d'Alene or in Pocatello, those kinds of things. Nixon drops in the chat, another idea to add, been thinking about getting a notary license, okay, to help folks if they need to with name changes, birth certificates. I don't have my notary, but that is certainly something that we could probably talk about, add the words helping cover expense wise, especially if you're going to use it for a community. So that's definitely something we could talk about. And yes, Natalie, the community center does have meals, and they always are doing the food things. They're always making sure people are fed. And they have, I know, a youth group that meets. I just did a chat there last weekend. So we'll definitely be partnering up with that. Yes, all the meetings.
We have some funds through our grant to host community meals, which we haven't really done through COVID. So if you're doing events or want to do events and want to partner, let us know, because I think we have funds for 1 or 2 of those a year. So
okay. That's awesome. Yeah, I was just speaking to the Wonder Woman group at the community center with Javi. So I love the notary idea. Jen, are you taking notes too, or is it because I have my
no, I totally went and found my notebook so that I could start writing down.
Well, I have like 30 posted, so we'll just
I'm super excited right now. Like, I'm buzzing. Like, I wish I could see everyone in person, because this is like giving me the energy for all the wrong reasons, right? I wish we didn't have to talk about this stuff, but if we are, like, what an amazing community we have that is just coming together in this moment. And I know that there's more, because we had so many registrations come through and life happens and you can't show up, but I'm so excited to organize from a distance with y'all, but for sure, like.
But you'll be here soon, and then we can try to.
I'll try to do things when I'm in person for sure.
We'll try to at least have community space. Name change. Yes, that's the other thing that before I went on maternity leave, I was really hoping to have some legal clinics, like working with lawyers for name changes, for married folks. If they come for marriage, then what does it look like to make sure that you've adopted your own children and you have a will in place, and something for partners if a hospital tries to deny you access, and all of those things, health directives. So I think that those things will also, that's why we definitely want to look for people, retired lawyers or something of that sort, people that can help. And then all the notaries we'll just have a little station to get everybody's signature. So I feel like we've populated a lot of ideas. Hopefully that feels generative. Hopefully it's a good way to end conversations that are tough when we start off with legislative discussions, because those are dire and depressing and hard. But I want to just kind of open up space for any last thoughts that people are having before we kind of close out for the evening? Is there anything that folks would like to share or amplify?
I'm
can
gonna
hear my
pause
keyboard.
recording before we get into the spot.
Yeah, please. Thanks, Jen.